Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel where your likes, comments, and subs are always greatly appreciated. For the past 2 years or so, I have been posting videos about the Zoom R20 multi-track recorder. Additionally, for over a year, I've been posting content about the smaller R12 unit as well. And every time I post a video, I get plenty of comments. Some of them are very technical in nature, of people asking me how can they move and manipulate the tracks that they record, how can they move the regions of audio that they've recorded on their R20 or their R12. How do they move it around within a track to different tracks? And there's a lot of questions surrounding that recording and movement of the track content. I thought I would make a single video here that kind of answers a lot of those frequently asked questions. Also with that, there's a lot of questions about recording limitations. And so I thought I would cover those recording limitations because they're directly related to the track content and specifically the audio regions and the number of regions that you can have with the R20 or with the R12. I'll be answering a couple different questions with this video, so feel free to jump around, and I'll be using the R20 to demonstrate how you move around some of these tracks and audio regions, but just be aware that for the most part, everything I'm showing you here with the R20 also can apply to the Zoom R12. All right, so with that, let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to cover when it comes to using the R20 or the R12 are the limitations with the recording capabilities of each one of these things. The first thing that you have to be aware of, obviously, is the number of tracks. With the R20, you have up to 16 tracks that you can use, and you can record up to 8 of those tracks simultaneously. On the smaller R12, you have only 8 tracks that you can use, and you can record up to 2 of them simultaneously. When you're recording, if you want to just use this device to record a band session, so you're in your garage, you've plugged in a couple mics, maybe you have guitars, you're playing kind of live, and you just want to hit record and let the thing go for a long period of time, well, you can do that, but there are limitations because for the R20 and for the R12, you can only record 1,350 measures or bars. So when I just open up a project, you can kind of see here that it's set to a BPM of 120. With 120 BPM, if you only have 1,300 bars to work with, that kind of equates to about 40 minutes of recording time. So as soon as you hit that 1,350 bars, the R20 or the R12 will stop recording. So that gets you a little bit over 40 minutes of time to record. If you want to record longer than that, because you're in the garage and you just want to have like a 2-hour jam session, there is a workaround for it, but you have to change the tempo of the project. So when you first go into the project, move that all the way down to 40 beats per minute, which is the minimum that you could set it to. Now, when you do that, you're going to have about 3 times the amount of recording time because each individual bar or measure is now much longer. So you can get a little bit over 2 hours of recording time when you do that. If this is something that you're looking to do once in a while with the R20 or with the R12, I think that's perfectly fine. But if this is something that you're going to use over and over again, or this is a feature why you want to buy the R20, I don't think I would rely on the R20 or the R12 to use it for these long recording sessions, just because things could kind of time out and you might lose everything because it didn't have a chance to close off any of the tracks by hitting the stop button or ending the recording phase. If you're looking to do something like that, I think I would look more towards a handy recorder or one of those mixing board hybrids. So that's the one thing that you could do to get around the recording limit when it comes to how many bars that you have. The other thing to be aware of besides tracks are audio regions and how many audio regions that you can record with and use using the R20 and the R12. In both cases, you're limited to 50 audio regions, recorded audio regions per project. And so what is an audio region? Well, if I just arm track number 1 here, I turned it on for recording. I'm just going to hit the record button. I'm not recording anything, but I'm just going to record here for a bar and stop it. Okay, so this would be one audio region on my first track. Touch off so you can see that. Now, if I just move the timeline over and I hit record again, I could do the exact same thing. I would be laying down some more audio, hit stop, and now I've got 2 audio regions on track 1. So I could do that up to 50 times. Now, that's not 50 times per track, that's 50 times per project. So in a DAW, if you're using that with a computer and you've got a laptop that's over $1,000 with a modern DAW, for the most part, if you're not really using effects, you kind of have unlimited number of tracks and regions that you could sort of build. So if you want to build up your songs one measure at a time, one pattern at a time, you can really do that with a DAW. You can do that here somewhat, but it's not the same kind of horsepower inside this budget multi-tracker compared to what you would have with a $1,000 laptop that's got at least 16 gigs of RAM and a decent processor inside. So you are limited to 50 audio regions. Something to note with that, as you record more audio regions, the device can slow down. So if you're just recording, you know, a lot of times I'm making a lot of songs that you might see my covers for retro video games. I'm using, you know, sometimes just 2 tracks, but a lot of times I'm using 4, 6, or 8 tracks with that. I'm not really running into any kind of problems with slowdown. But if I'm recording things with guitars and bass and drum machines and whatnot, and it gets a little bit more elaborate and I start using like 12 tracks at a time, I have noticed slowdown, especially once you start to get a combination of lots of tracks, and each track has multiple patterns or multiple regions that you've like sort of been using with it. It can slow down at times. That's something that you should be aware of when you are using the R20. So again, you've got up to 50 audio regions that you can use per project. If you start to max out with those, or if the device gets really slow, one of the things that you could do is if you have one particular track that has a lot of audio regions, you can then render that track and export it as one single continuous WAV file and then re-import it into your project, which would then free up some audio regions for yourself to work with. But with the R20, you've got 16 tracks to work with. Essentially, that sort of equates to about 3 regions per track if you're using every single track and you want to kind of load it up with multiple regions. It's not that much. You do hit that wall of 50 audio regions. Now, in the off chance that you might want to create a synth track like this with a synth track, the synth track by itself can have up to 80 audio regions. So you can actually make a bunch of patterns here using the piano scroll feature or using a MIDI input with a keyboard or a controller of some kind, and you can actually create up to 80 synth regions on one track, but you're still limited to the synth sounds that are within the R20, and I don't really recommend trying to make an entire song with that. I mean, it's okay for a little bit of background sounds and fillers that you want to make, but it's not fantastic sound selection that you have available to you. So it's not really all that exciting. So really think about it as you've got 50 audio regions that limit you per project for your recording. A lot of the questions that I get asked in the comment section pertain to how do I move my recorded regions around on the track screen. So you can move entire tracks, you can move individual regions, but you should be aware of how the movement software kind of works. Okay, so in this particular example, I have several different regions that you can see here on tracks 1 through 4. If I want to move these things around, I could do it in a variety of ways. So if I go up here, I've got an individual region. I could just touch that and I can move that individual region. But if I wanted to move everything from track 1 down to track 5, I could do this by touching and dragging the individual regions and moving it from here down to here, and from touching this one and then trying to move it perfectly in line and not misalign the timing when it comes to the time bar that I've got there up at the top. Well, I could do that by trying to move those individual regions, or the easier way to do it if you have multiple regions around is to just touch the track. So I've got number 1 selected right there, and just grab it at the number 1 and drag it down to the open number 5 slot. Okay, so now I've got it at the number 5 slot. If I undo that, it jumps back up to track number 1. If I want to swap it out with track number 4, per se. So now I could drag this thing down by touching 1, making sure that's the track that's highlighted. I could grab it and I touch it and drag it down to 4. What you'll notice is if I let go, it's now swapped track 1 and track 4. So now track 1 has this one continuous long region, and track 4 has that spot that had 2 different regions previously. So if you do that, just make sure that you are kind of slow and precise with your movement of the track from 1 down to 4. If you do it really fast and sloppy, you can misalign things a little bit and the software gets kind of janky with you, especially if you've got like 16 full tracks with a lot of regions, just because the device can slow down a little bit. So just be slow, be precise with it, and it should work for you. All right, can move that back up there. You'll also notice I've got this gap on track number 2. If I want to move track number 2 down to number 5, again, I could grab the audio region and try to perfectly pull it down and keep its place in time. But you're still better off going to track number 2, highlighting track 2 then, and moving it down. This way you don't have to realign anything. It still moves it down to 5, and you keep the alignment perfectly in place over here. So I recommend a lot of times, if you want to keep everything aligned and you don't want to mess anything up, to now just keep everything there and move it with the tracks by grabbing the number and dragging the number down on your track view screen. If you want to move audio regions around, you can do that in a variety of ways too, but you have to be aware of some of the limitations. If I want to touch one of the audio regions, I can now move this audio region. I can move it right, I can move it left, I can move the entire thing up, and I can move the entire thing down. But that's because I only have one region highlighted. I can move multiple regions at the same time. If I touch that region and then I touch it again, I now get the region settings up here at the top, so I can copy, delete, split, or select. What you want to do is touch select. Once you have that highlighted, now I can touch these other audio regions. Again, kind of be slow, be precise with it with your finger or using one of these types of styluses. Now, when I have selected multiple regions like this, I can no longer drag it up and down and move it across tracks. However, I can now still move all of these things left and right, and they will maintain their spacing. So you see where like track number 2 has that spacing where it doesn't start where the other ones do, but I still maintain the ratio of where it's spaced out compared to tracks 1, 3, and 4. So with all these selected, I can move them left and right on the timeline, but I cannot move them up and down to different tracks. When you're done with that, just hit the deselect button at the top, and now you've deselected all of those regions that you previously had selected to move around. The one unique thing is that if I touch track 1, which has these 2 audio regions up here, if I touch that and then I hit it again for select and I just select those 2, and now I'm not across any other track. So I've selected multiple audio regions, but they're all on track 1. In this case, I can move it right and left, but I can also move that down. So that only works if you have the regions all selected on a single track. If you span multiple tracks when you are selecting the regions, you can no longer move those things up and down. You're limited to just left and right movements with those audio regions. Okay, so you can do that. You can also delete multiple regions at the same time using the exact same type of mechanism. The last thing that I'll mention is that when you are moving regions around, I highly recommend that you use either markers or really use the timeline marker as your guide. So if I want to move a region around, say this bottom one, you could see the waveform is visible there. It's a little bit glaring with the way that it's sort of set up with my camera. But when I start to move it, the waveform disappears, which can disorient you in terms of how you're trying to align things up sometimes. You could see for these kind of songs, a lot of songs, I just don't use the first bar and I start on the second bar because that acts as my counting for everything. So if I want to move this around, what I tend to do is I will move my timeline marker first into the exact position that I want to move this region to. So this way, when I select it and I start to move it, I can use the timeline marker there as a guide to know when I should drop down my audio region so it lands perfectly at the spot that I want it to land into. So make sure that you use that timeline marker because it gives you a nice guide, a nice vertical guide on the track view screen. All right, that's all I wanted to cover for this frequently asked question video. I hope you found the content helpful. If you have any other kind of questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below on this video. And thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.